The morning sun filtered through the windows of Valley Fresh Grocery as shoppers pushed their carts down the aisles. By register number 3 stood Michelle Turner, arranging paper bags and organizing her station. The early rush had just begun to slow down, giving her a moment to catch her breath. Michelle had worked at Valley Fresh for almost 5 years now. At 32, she wasn't where she'd imagined she'd be in life, but there was something comforting about the routine. The familiar beep of the scanner, the rustle of grocery bags, the small conversations with regular customers who had, over time, become something like friends. "Good morning, Mrs. Chen," Michelle called out, waving to an elderly woman who came in every Tuesday for fresh vegetables. Mrs. Chen smiled and waved back before disappearing down the cereal aisle. The store manager, Mr. Peterson, had been extra strict lately about following company policies. Just last week, he'd given a formal warning to Tom at Register 5 for letting a regular customer use an expired coupon. "Rules keep us in business," Mr. Peterson had announced during their morning meeting. "Bend them, and you might as well break them." Michelle straightened her name badge and glanced at the clock. 4 more hours until her lunch break. She'd packed a peanut butter sandwich and an apple. Nothing fancy, but it would keep her going until dinner. The automatic doors slid open and a gust of cool air swept through the entrance. An elderly man stepped inside, pausing for a moment, as if to gather his bearings. He wore a faded blue cap with military insignia, the kind Michelle had seen her grandfather wear in old photographs. His jacket hung slightly loose on his thin frame, and he walked with the careful steps of someone who knew what it meant to fall. Michelle watched as he picked up a small hand basket instead of a cart and made his way slowly through the store. There was something in the way he moved, a dignity, a carefulness, that made her heart squeeze a little. 20 minutes later, the man appeared at her register. His basket contained just the essentials: a loaf of white bread, a half-gallon of milk, 3 cans of chicken soup, and surprisingly a small bouquet of daisies wrapped in green paper. "Found everything all right today, sir?" Michelle asked, smiling as she began scanning his items. The man nodded. "Yes, thank you, miss." His voice had that particular gentle raspiness that comes with age. Up close, Michelle could see the pins on his cap, service medals that spoke of sacrifice and duty from long ago. As she scanned the flowers, she noticed how carefully he held them, almost tenderly. These weren't just a casual purchase. They meant something. "These are lovely," she said, placing them gently in a separate bag so they wouldn't be crushed. "They're for my wife," he replied, a small smile lifting the corners of his weathered face. "Today's our anniversary, 53 years. Well, would have been." Something in his voice changed with those last words, becoming softer, more distant. Michelle felt a lump form in her throat. "That's beautiful," she said. "Congratulations on such a long marriage." "Thank you, dear, the best years of my life." He reached into his worn leather wallet as Michelle finished ringing up the items. "That'll be $23.42. She said. The man's fingers, spotted with age and slightly trembling, counted out the bills. 10, 15, 16. His movement slowed as he reached the end of the cash in his wallet. A flicker of confusion, then embarrassment crossed his face. He counted again, more carefully this time. "I'm so sorry," he said, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. "I thought I had enough. Could you put the flowers back? I need the other things." As he spoke, Michelle noticed a photograph tucked inside his wallet. A black and white picture of a young woman with a bright smile and dark curly hair. The corner of the photo was worn thin, as if it had been touched 1,000 times over the years. "It's no problem at all," Michelle said, already reaching for the flowers to void them from the purchase. But something stopped her, the way his eyes lingered on the daisies, the way his shoulders had slumped just slightly. Without allowing herself to overthink it, Michelle made a decision. "Actually, sir, we have a special today." She lowered her voice, making it sound like a secret between them. "Buy 2 soup cans, get flowers half off. And—" She glanced around as if checking no one was listening. "For veterans, we take another $1 off. So you actually have just enough." His eyes, pale blue and clouded with age, widened slightly. Are you sure? I don't want to cause any trouble. Absolutely sure, Michelle said firmly. She discreetly swiped her own debit card for the difference, $7.35. It was nearly an hour's worth of her wage, but the way the man's face brightened made it instantly worth every penny. Well, that's mighty kind, he said, his voice steadier now. My Louise always said daisies were honest flowers. No pretension, just simple beauty. He carefully took the bag with the flowers. Thank you for helping me keep our tradition. It's my pleasure, Michelle replied, meaning it completely. Have a wonderful day, sir. You too, young lady, you too. He gave her a small nod, almost like a bow, and made his way towards the exit, standing a little straighter than when he had come in. Michelle watched him go, a warm feeling spreading through her chest. Sometimes, small kindnesses were all we had to offer each other in this world. She turned to greet her next customer, unaware that Mr. Peterson had been watching the entire interaction through the security camera feed in his office, his face darkening with each passing moment. Less than an hour later, Sarah was called into the manager's office. Mr. Henderson, a stern man in his 50s who had inherited the store from his father, sat behind his desk with a printout of the transaction. You know our policy on covering customer purchases, he said coldly. Zero tolerance. This is theft from the register, plain and simple. But sir, he was a veteran, and it was only, rules are rules, Sarah. I can't make exceptions, not even for employees who've been here, as long as you have. I'm afraid I have to let you go. Sarah felt as if the floor had dropped from beneath her. As a single mother with a son in middle school and rent due next week, losing her job wasn't just inconvenient, it was potentially catastrophic. Fighting back tears, she cleaned out her locker and walked out the front entrance, past curious customers and whispering coworkers. In the parking lot, she finally allowed herself to cry, leaning against her decade-old sedan and wondering how she would tell her son they might need to move again. The daisies felt light in Harold Winter's hands as he walked through the wrought iron gates of Pine Hill Cemetery. He'd been making this same walk every Tuesday for the past 7 years, ever since Louise had passed. The groundskeeper, an older man named Phil, waved from where he was trimming around a headstone. Morning, Harold, Phil called. Beautiful day. For a visit. Harold nodded and raised the flowers in greeting. The cemetery was peaceful this morning. Birds singing in the oak trees, a light breeze carrying the scent of freshly cut grass. Louise would have loved it. She had always preferred being outdoors, tending to her garden or sitting on their back porch with a glass of iced tea, watching the world go by. The path to Louise's grave was so familiar that Harold could have walked, it blindfolded. Third row from the eastern fence, halfway down beneath the shade of a maple tree that turned brilliant red every fall. The gray granite headstone was simple but elegant, just like she had been. Hello, sweetheart, he said as he reached the spot. I brought your favorites. Harold carefully removed last week's wilted flowers from the small metal vase embedded in the ground. He added fresh water from the nearby spigot and arranged the new daisies, making sure they stood upright. Louise had always been particular about how flowers were displayed. Had a bit of trouble getting these today, he continued, speaking as naturally as if she were standing right beside him. Almost didn't have enough money, but a nice young lady at the store helped me out. He eased himself down onto the small bench he'd installed next to the grave. His knees weren't what they used to be, especially on damp mornings like this one. She reminded me of you, actually. That same kindness in her eyes. The kind that doesn't ask for anything in return. Harold adjusted his cap, pushing it back slightly. You would have liked her, Lou. In the distance, a lawnmower started up, its steady hum a familiar backdrop to his weekly conversations. Harold told Louise about the small events of his week. Owned the library book he'd finished, the robin that had built a nest in their old mailbox, the call he'd received from their grandson in California. Doctor says my blood pressure's looking better, he informed her proudly. Says whatever I'm doing, I should keep it up. I didn't tell him it's just me talking to you that keeps me sane. The wind picked up slightly, rustling the leaves overhead. Harold imagined it was Louise's laugh, that gentle musical sound that had been the soundtrack to their 53 years together. I miss you something awful, Lou, he said. his voice dropping lower. Some days I wake up and still reach for your side of the bed before I remember. He sat in silence for a few minutes, watching a butterfly land briefly on one of the daisies before fluttering away. Eventually, he checked his watch. Nearly noon. He needed to head to the Veterans of Foreign Wars Hall for the monthly meeting. I'll be back next Tuesday, he promised, easing himself to his feet. Same time, same flowers. He touched the top of the headstone gently. Love you, Lou. The VFW hall was only a 15-minute walk from the cemetery. Harold could have driven, but walking helped keep his old joints from stiffening up. The doctor had been clear about that. Keep moving or start rusting. The hall was a simple brick building with an American flag flying out front. Inside, the main room was set up with folding chairs and tables. A coffee pot gurgled in the corner, filling the air with its rich aroma. A dozen or so men and a few women, all in their 60s and older, were already gathered, some wearing parts of their old uniforms, others in civilian clothes with service pins on their lapels. "Harold!" called Richard Thompson, waving from a table near the window. "Saved you a seat." Harold made his way over, nodding greetings to the other veterans as he passed. Richard was Army, just like Harold had been, though he'd served in Korea, while Harold had been in Vietnam. Despite the different wars, they'd formed a fast friendship over shared experiences that civilians could never quite understand. "How's tricks?" Richard asked, pushing a styrofoam cup of coffee toward him. "Can't complain," Harold answered automatically. It was what he always said, regardless of how he was actually feeling. "Though I nearly had to skip the flowers for Louise today." As he stirred a packet of sugar into his coffee, Harold recounted what had happened at the grocery store, his embarrassment at coming up short, the kindness of the young cashier who had helped him. "She made up some nonsense about a veteran's discount," he explained. "But I could see she was covering the difference herself. You don't forget how to read people after 30 years in customer service." Frank DuPont, who sat across the table, leaned forward with interest. Frank was the youngest of their group at 62 and still very active in local politics. He served on the town council and was known for his strong opinions and even stronger connections. "Which store was this?" Frank asked. "Valley Fresh," Harold replied. "The one on Maple Street." "And the young lady's name?" Harold smiled. "Michelle." Her name tag said Michelle. Dark hair, kind smile. The sort of person who looks you in the eye when you talk. Frank's expression grew thoughtful. "That doesn't sound right," he said, pulling out his phone. "Valley Fresh has been pushing this Community First campaign. The owner gave this big speech at the last council meeting about supporting local heroes." He tapped at his screen. "They even got a tax break for their veteran hiring program. Well, their manager didn't seem too concerned about veterans when he was counting my change," Harold said with a dry laugh. The conversation shifted to other topics: an upcoming memorial, service, plans for the 4th of July parade, complaints about changes to veterans' benefits. But Harold noticed Frank continuing to frown at his phone, typing messages with his thumb. After the meeting ended, as Harold was putting on his jacket to leave, Frank approached him again. "Harold, would you mind telling your story one more time? Pat Wilson is on her way over." "The mayor?" Harold asked, surprised. "What for?" "Because," Frank said, a determined gleam in his eye. "That young lady who helped you shouldn't be punished for doing the right thing. And I have a feeling that's exactly what happened." Exactly 30 minutes after Michelle had walked out of Valley Fresh Grocery with tears in her eyes, a sleek black town car pulled into the parking lot. It moved slowly past the rows of customer vehicles before coming to a stop directly in front of the store entrance in the spot marked "Reserved for Management." The store's automatic doors slid open as a group of customers exited, shopping bags in hand. They paused, curious as the town car's back door opened. Mayor Patricia Wilson stepped out first. At 58, she cut an impressive figure in her navy blue pantsuit and sensible heels. Her salt and pepper hair was pulled back in a practical bun, and she wore the same pearl earrings that had become her signature accessory in every official photograph around town. Behind her came Frank DuPont, still in his VFW cap, followed by Harold Winters and two other people. A woman with a notebook, and a man carrying a professional camera with the local newspaper's logo on the strap. "Are you sure about this, Pat?" the woman with the notebook asked quietly. "Going in like this is making quite a statement." "That's the point, Nancy," the mayor replied, her voice low but firm. "Sometimes statements need to be made." She turned to Harold. "You ready for this?" The elderly veteran nodded, standing a little straighter. "Been ready for harder things than this, ma'am." Inside the store, the afternoon rush was in full swing. Customers pushed carts down crowded aisles while employees restocked shelves and manned registers. A teenager was mopping up a spill near the frozen foods section. The overhead speakers played a tinny version of a pop song from 10 years ago. The group's entrance didn't go unnoticed. Heads turned. Conversations paused. Even the piped-in music seemed to fade as Mayor Wilson strode purposefully toward the customer service desk. Behind the counter, a young woman with trainee on her name. Tag looked up, her eyes widening in recognition. "Mayor Wilson, how can I help you today?" "I need to speak with Mr. Peterson," the mayor said pleasantly. "Is he available?" I'll check right away," the trainee stammered, reaching for the phone. She pressed a button and spoke in hushed tones, casting nervous glances at the growing group of onlookers gathering around the unusual scene. Less than a minute later, Mr. Peterson emerged from the back office, straightening his tie as he walked. His customer service smile was firmly in place until he registered who was waiting for him. The smile faltered. "Mayor Wilson," he said, extending his hand. "This is unexpected. Is there something I can help you with?" The mayor shook his hand, briefly. "Robert, we need to talk about an incident that occurred in your store today. Is there somewhere more private we can speak?" Mr. Peterson's eyes darted to Frank, then to Harold, then to the reporter and photographer. His Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed. "Of course, my office is just—" "Actually," Frank cut in, "given that Valley Fresh prides itself on being a community store, perhaps this is a community matter worth discussing right here." His tone was pleasant, but there was steel beneath it. "I'm not sure what you're referring to, but I assure you, whatever it is," Mr. Peterson began, but Harold stepped forward. "You fired a young lady today," the veteran said, his voice quiet, but carrying in the now hushed store, "for helping me buy flowers for my wife's grave." A murmur ran through the gathering crowd of customers and employees. Mr. Peterson's face flushed. "Sir, with all due respect, that's a personnel matter, and I'm not at liberty to discuss—" "I understand privacy concerns," Mayor Wilson interjected smoothly, "but I think we can speak in general terms. Valley Fresh received significant tax incentives last year based on your community support initiatives, particularly those benefiting veterans. The town council approved those incentives because we believed in your stated company values." The reporter's pen was moving rapidly across her notebook. The photographer had positioned himself to capture the scene, though he hadn't started taking photos yet. "Perhaps," the mayor continued, "you could explain to us how firing an employee for showing kindness to a decorated Vietnam veteran aligns with those values." Mr. Peterson's professional demeanor was cracking. He glanced around at the watching customers, at his employees who had stopped what they were doing to listen. "There are policies," he said stiffly. "Rules that every employee agrees to follow when they're hired. We can't make exceptions." "That's interesting," Frank said, pulling out his phone, "because I have here the transcript from your presentation to the town council last year. You specifically said, and I quote, 'At Valley Fresh, we believe in empowering our employees to make decisions that strengthen community bonds. Our staff doesn't just follow rule books, they follow their hearts.'" A few customers nodded in agreement. One older woman near the front muttered, "Hypocrite," just loud enough to be heard. That was meant as a general philosophy," Mr. Peterson stammered. "But when it comes to financial transactions, we have to be strict. It's a slippery slope." Harold stepped forward again. The store lights caught the service pins on his cap, making them gleam. "I don't know much about slopes, slippery or otherwise," he said. "What I know is that your employee, Michelle, saw an old man having a hard day and did something kind. Cost her about $7 from what I figure. Cost you nothing." His voice grew stronger. And for that you took away her livelihood. A single mother, from what she mentioned. The whispers among the customers grew louder. A single mother? Someone repeated. Fired for helping a veteran? Another voice added. The reporter was writing furiously now. The photographer had begun taking pictures, the soft click of his camera barely audible over the growing noise. Mayor Wilson held up a hand, and the crowd quieted. Robert, she said, her tone reasonable but unyielding. Our town has always prided itself on being a community that takes care of its own. Veterans like Harold here served our country. People like Michelle serve our community every day in smaller but still significant ways. Now, I came here hoping we could resolve this situation quietly, but I'm starting to think that might not be possible. Mr. Peterson's eyes darted from the mayor to the reporter to the growing crowd of disapproving faces. What exactly are you asking me to do? He asked, his voice notably quieter. For starters, Frank said, you could reconsider your decision about Michelle's employment. And perhaps, the mayor added, review whether your company policies truly reflect the values you presented to the town council when applying for those tax incentives. Mr. Peterson looked like a man watching his carefully constructed world crumble around him. A bead of sweat traced its way down his temple. I'll need to call the district manager, he said weakly. The mayor smiled. A politician's smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. That sounds like an excellent first step. We'll wait. Michelle sat at her small kitchen table, a pile of job applications spread before her. The afternoon sun slanted through the blinds, casting stripes of light across the papers. She'd spent hours printing applications at the library, using up her last few dollars on the copy machine fees. Retail associate, customer service representative, cashier, she murmured, scanning the options. 5 years of experience, and here she was, starting over again. From the living room came the sound of cartoons. Bobby was home from school, sprawled on their worn couch with a bowl of cereal. She hadn't told him yet about losing her job. How do you explain to a 10-year-old that you were fired for being kind? The kitchen clock read 5:17 p.m. Michelle rubbed her eyes, feeling the beginning of a headache forming behind her temples. She needed to start dinner soon, something that would stretch their dwindling groceries. Maybe pasta again. A knock at the door startled her. They rarely had visitors, especially on weekdays. I'll get it, Bobby called, already scrambling off the couch. Wait, honey, Michelle said, pushing back her chair. Let me check first. She peered through the peephole and froze in confusion. Standing on her front porch was a small crowd of people, including, was that the mayor and Mr. Peterson from the store? Michelle opened the door slowly, suddenly conscious of her faded t-shirt and the hole in the knee of her jeans. Michelle Turner? Mayor Wilson asked, though it didn't really seem like a question. Yes, Michelle replied, her voice catching slightly. I hope we're not intruding, the mayor continued with a warm smile. But we have something important to discuss with you. May we come in? Michelle's mind raced. Was this about her firing? Had she done something wrong? Was the store pressing charges over those $7? Mom? Bobby appeared at her side, his curious eyes taking in the unusual gathering. Who are they? They're... Michelle hesitated, not sure how to explain. We're friends, said an elderly man, stepping forward. With a jolt, Michelle recognized him, the veteran from that morning, the one with the flowers. You're the flower man, Bobby said, earning a small laugh from the group. That's right, Harold smiled. Your mom helped me this morning. Michelle looked from face to face, trying to make sense of the situation. Beyond Harold and Mr. Peterson, she recognized Frank DuPont, whom she knew from local news coverage, and, of course, Mayor Wilson. There were also 2 people she didn't know, a woman with a notebook and a man with a camera, plus another official-looking woman in a blazer. Please, she finally managed, stepping back. Come in. Sorry about the mess. Their small living room wasn't designed for so many visitors. Bobby quickly gathered his cereal bowl and scattered school books while Michelle hastily straightened the couch cushions. Don't worry about that, Mayor Wilson said kindly. We won't stay long. Mr. Peterson has something he'd like to say to you. All eyes turned to the store manager, who looked distinctly uncomfortable. His normally immaculate tie was slightly askew, and a light sheen of sweat covered his forehead. "Ms. Turner," he began, clearing his throat, "it has come to my attention that my decision this morning was overly hasty." Michelle crossed her arms, waiting. "After reviewing the situation and consulting with district management, I'd like to offer you your position back at Valley Fresh." The words hung in the air. Michelle felt a surge of conflicting emotions: relief, anger, confusion. With some adjustments, Mr. Peterson continued when she didn't immediately respond. "We'd like to promote you to assistant manager with a corresponding increase in pay, and of course back pay for today." Bobby tugged at Michelle's sleeve. "Does this mean you're not fired anymore?" he whispered, though everyone could hear. "It seems that way," Michelle said, still trying to process what was happening. "But I don't understand. What changed since this morning?" Frank DuPont stepped forward. "What changed, Ms. Turner, was that Harold here came to our VFW meeting and told us what happened. How you helped him get flowers for his wife's grave, and how Mr. Peterson fired you for it. And," Mayor Wilson added, "when we learned that Valley Fresh had fired an employee for helping a veteran, while simultaneously receiving tax breaks for their veteran-friendly initiatives, well, let's just say it raised some concerns." The woman with the notebook, who Michelle now realized must be a reporter, smiled encouragingly. "It's quite a story. The kind of thing people should hear about, don't you think?" Mr. Peterson shifted uncomfortably. "As I was saying, we would be very pleased to have you return to Valley Fresh, effective immediately." Michelle looked at Bobby, who was watching the scene with wide eyes. A steady job meant stability, meant keeping their apartment, meant not having to tell her son they needed to move again. But something didn't feel right about simply accepting. "What about the policy?" she asked. "The one about not covering customer shortfalls?" Mr. Peterson coughed. "We're revising certain policies. In fact, we're establishing a new program." He glanced at the mayor, who nodded slightly. "A community care fund. Customers can donate small amounts at checkout, which will be used to help veterans and others in need. You'll be overseeing it as part of your new responsibilities." Harold stepped forward then, his weathered hand reaching out to clasp Michelle's. "What you did for me today," he began, his voice thick with emotion. "Those flowers were for my wife, Louise. We were married 53 years before I lost her. Every Tuesday I bring her daisies. It's our tradition." Harold reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, worn photograph, the same one Michelle had glimpsed in his wallet that morning. He handed it to her. A young woman with bright eyes and dark curls smiled up from the faded image. "That's my Louise," Harold said proudly. "She always said you could tell a person's character by how they treat others when there's nothing to gain. You passed her test today." The official-looking woman in the blazer cleared her throat. "That's not all, Ms. Turner. The town council just held an emergency session. We've unanimously voted to present you with our Civic Heart Award." She handed Michelle an official-looking envelope. "It comes with a $5,000 education grant that you can use for yourself or set aside for your son's future." Bobby's gasp was audible. $5,000, Mom." Michelle felt tears welling in her eyes. Just hours ago, she had been sitting in her car, wondering how she would pay next week's rent. And now, "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "Say yes," Harold encouraged, his eyes twinkling. "An old man wants to make sure you're there next Tuesday when he buys his flowers." Michelle looked around the room, at the mayor's approving smile, at Mr. Peterson's chastened expression, at the reporter poised to turn this into tomorrow's headline, and finally, at Bobby's excited face. "Yes," she said firmly, "I accept. Thank you all." As handshakes and congratulations went around, Michelle noticed that Bobby had slipped away. He returned a moment later, something clutched in his hand. "Mr. Flowerman," he said, approaching Harold. "This is for you to give to your wife next time." He held out a small paper crane, folded from blue construction paper. "My teacher says in Japan, cranes mean long life and happiness." Harold accepted, the crane with the solemnity it deserved. "It's perfect," he said. "Louise would have loved it." Outside, as the unusual group prepared to leave, the photographer asked for one photo: Michelle, Harold, and Bobby together on the front porch. "For the article," the reporter explained, "we're calling it Small Act of Kindness Creates Big Change." As they posed together, Harold leaned close to Michelle. "Sometimes," he said quietly, "the world has a way of making things right. You just have to give it a chance."